Welcome to the Life Self-Mastery Podcast, where we bring in entrepreneurs who have created online businesses and improved their lifestyles. Here's your host, Rohit Malhotra.
Hi everyone, I'm Rohit from Life Self-Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Justin Dauer, who's a Chicago designer educated at the School of Art Institute of Chicago and the Vice President of User Experience and Development at Bswift, with Josef Müller-Brockmann and user advocacy claiming equal parts of his creative heart. He's crafted digital experiences for clients like Sony, Chase, IBM, and the U.S. Department of Energy. His passion is creative workspaces and cultures, and he focuses on increasing creative productivity as well as workplace retention with his new book, Cultivating a Creative Culture. A huge thank you to Angel Powers for connecting Justin for this episode. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Rohit. Great to be here.
Awesome. So, I saw that article which is resetting agency culture. What made you write that article, and then what made you write your new book?
Actually, the first point you made is directly related to why I wrote the book. So, resetting agency culture, I wrote for List Apart, which is a big e-zine, I guess, if you will, within the web design and UX community. And at that time, when I wrote that article, that article is through the lens of agency specifically, and I was feeling pretty burned out about the inherent issues with agency culture, and that is to say, people's value to the organization being, who's the last one out the door. Or, just people in the organization specifically being, more viewed as a name on a spreadsheet rather than a human being coming into the office and bringing their abilities and their passion into the workplace. So after having been in the agency sector for a good stretch, that kind of fueled me to write that article. And the feedback I received was more agnostic to business or agency specifically, and came from all kinds of industries. I got feedback from people in newspaper, people in television, people in radio. My takeaway from that is that this was less about the agency experience and more about the human experience, which is why I felt this was something bigger than that article. So that's what led me to write Cultivating Creative Culture, which is agnostic to business. It's not agency specific at all. It's written a little more for designers and developers, but that said, the takeaway is about having a human-centered workplace and empathy being at the core of everything. That should resonate, agnostic of what your role or position is.
Absolutely. You spend the most time with other people in the workplace. My question is, what is the number one problem in workplace culture today? And what is the best way to fix this problem?
That's actually a great question. I would say the number one problem is broadly a lack of a human-centered approach. And I say human-centered because that's my passion, and that's what my role is right now, human-centered design and development. But most often, it is not about people first in business. It's about product launch first, or it's about the almighty dollar first. And these things are symptomatic or indicative of a core issue of lack of empathy in the workplace. And that could be, if someone, like I said, the value of someone at an agency, I said before, is who is the last person out the door. The empathy there is just completely missing, because what if someone has to pick up their child? What if someone has to take care of a relative at home or something like that? And the simple delineation or the simple view of a human being as a human being, about an individual being at the forefront of everything, is missing in so many businesses. You could see this in tech, in big tech. You could see this in agencies, as I said. You could see this industry-wide, agnostic of design completely, which is, of course, where I come from. So the number one problem really is just viewing people as people and having empathy at the core of business decisions, rather than the almighty dollar fueling everything, or just speed to market on launch.
Okay, and what are your suggestions on how to encourage empathy in creative work environments? Because in agencies or in other corporates, you have that pressure from clients from because profit making is what most of the businesses focus on. So how to encourage empathy?
Really, that starts at the top and it trickles down. I mean, leaders need to set the example here. I mean, people view how leaders treat the employees or treat their teammates, and that sets the tone for everything. It's really compassion by example. So encouraging empathy in a workplace environment, needs to start at the top, and policies as defined by the business stakeholders. Like I said, is it flexible work time? Is it having nooks around the office space that encourage people to, what I like to say is pause with intent? And that is not to say to, there are certainly, perks in the office, like a PlayStation or an Xbox or a pinball machine, or, those are kind of what I they're nice to have, but they're, at the end of the day, they're kind of perks without value. It's good to blow off steam, but areas around the office where people can pause and maybe around a coffee machine and talk about, just communicate with someone as a human being and ask, not only how is work going, but how are you doing today? How is family? How are you feeling? And not have someone looking over at you and tapping on their watch and kind of twisting their head and giving you the stink eye about, if you have time to talk, why don't you have the time to work? That all comes down from the top about having those spaces readily available around the office, making sure time not at your desk isn't judged. Everyone needs time to, diffuse or have a space around the office where they can openly explore creativity or collaboration away from the project capacity. We know, project work keeps the lights on, but also a happy and supported employee also makes for a stellar human-centered product. So really, it's kind of a long-winded answer, but the bottom line on top is that this starts at the top with leadership and it trickles down from there.
Okay. Just in 2018 was a pivotal moment with the Me Too movement in US and in countries like India and other Asian and European countries and worldwide. So how can employees and can approach management to make vital workplace changes?
Well, management needs to make themselves approachable in the first place. This has to be a known quantity. If someone is not approachable, if corporate policy is not approachable, people will not feel supported to approach leadership if there is an issue in that capacity. So many of these answers are going to come back to leadership, and leadership makes or breaks situations like this. Is this in the handbook? Is this a known quantity when someone is hired? Do they feel supported? Do the employees feel supported in the office at all times? If there are any instances of harassment or anything in that capacity, do employees feel the open door to have someone genuinely empathetically support them at that point? So all these policies have to be baked into the culture and baked into, I'll say that I'm air quoting my finger, baked into the handbook and the DNA of the organization. Straight from the get-go. I mean, there's no waffling in this in any capacity. So that's my answer there. Empathy and support has to be baked in throughout the organization.
Okay, and initially, we have a lot of listeners who are running their own businesses and they're trying to set their own cultures. How to build teams and cultivate cultures within organizations so that when the company really scales up, they have the right cultures and right sort of people who are joining them. Do you recommend a playbook or set of values to be decided when the company is just starting out?
Just as a new business has to put together a business plan. I mean, you have to have your culture plan in place as well. This is something that is so often a misstep. When people by and large are starting businesses because they want to go into a place that is a good place to work, and oftentimes those businesses in a startup capacity lose their way as success takes hold, or as employees are rapidly hired. that just falls by the wayside, and that needs to be as important as the business plan throughout. So when an agency or a business is 10, 15 people, clearly it's easier at that point to make sure people are taken care of, or you can just look 20 feet across the room and see how someone's doing. As businesses scale or scale quickly, or if you're joining a business that is 5,000, 20,000, 100,000 people, again, this needs to, you'll see many businesses now in tech and elsewhere that have, VP of culture or C-level culture people, because they recognize that someone needs to consistently at the top carry the culture through. And that needs to be their sole role in making sure people are engaged and supported in a human-centered, empathetic fashion. So I guess my advice there would be never to let culture fall through the cracks if you're a 5-person or 2-person startup, or if you're a 500 or 10,000 person business. This needs to be as important as the business plan and the bottom line.
Okay, so I was reading the article that you've written, and you've talked about Yelp, Google, and the few other companies who've created the right sort of environment. But what motivates people to produce their best work? Are they looking for recognition, money, reward? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a lot of businesses in tech, and I kind of intimated this earlier. Have perks that are designed to, on paper, they look appealing. And, like there's the sleep pods that, Google is a user of, that are kind of, they're famous for, where if you're having a long day, you can kind of go and in this futuristic little, sensory chamber and get some rest. And it looks great. It looks great. It looks cool. It sounds cool, and it sounds like a cool perk. Or if some businesses have a perk where if you're working after 8 or 9 o'clock, we'll pay for your cab home, or we'll send a cleaning service to your house. And on paper that sounds great. They're looking out for me. But if you dig deeper, you realize these air quotes perks are designed to keep you at the office longer, or to if everything's here, why go home? Or you're sacrificing your life and your relationships and your ability to just have a life outside of work completely at that point. And some people are about that. Some people are, and I'm not taking a dig at that at all. Some people are very much defined by their work, and that is what they're all about. And if that's where you obtain your sense of happiness, more power to you. But many people need to have a life outside of a work, and they need to have time to defuse outside of a corporate environment. And perks aside, that's something when you're looking at joining a new business or a new sector or a new role in totality. Just look deeper at those perks that look good on paper, or are sold really well by recruiting when you're talking to a new business, because there might be something a little more I don't want to say nefarious, but it might just be more indicative of unhealthy behaviors that are being established in the DNA of the culture.
Absolutely. My next question: how do you best indulge and develop your own creativity?
Yeah, that's a timely one for me. So I just had a newborn that's 5 weeks old. Oh, thank you. 5 weeks old at this point. So my answer here is intrinsically tied into that, and that choosing your moments is what it's all about. So I have, I'm at the office all day, and I come home, and then it's I have a toddler and a newborn. It's taking care of them, and it's supporting my wife. And once there's time to breathe, it's 9 o'clock and you're beat. And then at that point, it's, what do I do here? Do I blow off some steam and play a video game? Do I read a book? Do I do some writing? Do I do some design? And you just have to, you can be prescriptive about that in a sense and have a calendar and say, Monday is video game day, Tuesday is drawing day. But really, you just have to respect where you are at on a given day and what your mind and body need at that point. And you can't judge yourself too much. I'm currently writing the second edition of my book, and I have a calendar that I'm working against, but I'll tell you, some days I just don't have it. I sit, I know I need to write, and I sit at the screen when it's like 9, 10 o'clock after a day like that, and it's just not happening. And I might get 2 words in, and it's a wasted evening at that point. So really just respecting where you're at. And I talk about humility a lot in my book, in a introspective sense, as well as being receptive of other people's humility. And it's being, humble about respecting where you're at, or where your mind is at that given point, and just kind of going with the flow. So my creativity, I guess, is a little more confined these days when I have those outlets. But I think it's key if you're working in I'll say a design setting or an agency setting, not to let your creative outlet be completely defined by your work, by the deliverables, by when you come in the morning, the papers that might be on your desk saying this has to go out by end of day. If you define your creativity in a sense like that, you're going to burn out and you're going to lose that passion, and that's the most precious thing in the world. So always having an outlet to explore your creativity, or pause with intent, but you just have to be respectful if your moments are finite, what you actually do with them.
Okay, and I hope eating a bowl of cereal also helps every night.
That's true.
Awesome. So, you've been into user experience and UX. Now, if somebody wants to learn more about how to create a design for the products, what is the best way to learn about it, and how did you learn through it?
Well, me personally, I when I was in art school, it was kind of just when being a web designer, this is going to date me, is when being a web designer was just starting to manifest as a career. And you would say to your parents, I'm going to be a web designer. And they would say, what the heck is that? So I went to the School of the Art Institute, and I have a formal training in visual communication or graphic design. But my curiosity when I was there was always in tech, and just like starting to build web pages was something that was just kind of emerging, or solidifying, I should say. So I self-taught myself code, or how to program, do HTML when I was at the School of the Art Institute, and that absolutely fascinated me, the marriage of design and code and the digital landscape. So I have my formal training is in graphic design and typography and visual communication, and then my interest was in tech. So I moved to the East Coast right after the Art Institute, and I took a job with an internet magazine called Interface Monthly in Portland, Maine. And I became their first web designer, and I built their first website. And I also did layout for the magazine, and did some illustration for the magazine. And then just from there, I just, the digital landscape absolutely fascinated me, and code as art, and design as art, and visual communication as art. The marriage of those 3 things has kind of fueled me in my career. So things are a little different now. That was 20 years ago, and now there's copious amounts of online e-zines and conferences and UX boot camps. And I don't want to be too prescriptive in saying what the best way for anyone is to approach, people. Some people, when they enroll in a UX boot camp, they're doing that after work, or they're doing that after they drop their kids off, or that works for them. Or some people, are self-taught, and they go to conferences and they just read online, or focus on social media. That works for them. For me, that formal design education, and then just having an interest in tech, that worked for me. So there are numerous routes to pursue there. To get into UX, for me, the I call it skeletal design, placement without visual design applied to it for UX and wireframing. I remember when you couldn't even bill a client for that, because you would present this as a deliverable, and the client would say, what is this? This is boxes on a page. And then we were thinking, can we bill them for this? Can we charge for this? And now it's like, of course you do. Like, that's a formal part of the process. And then it was, can we interview the client and can we bill for that? Like, we want to figure out what we're doing before we go into Photoshop. And now it's like, of course, as part of a human-centered design process, you go through discovery and you do interviews and you do research. Of course you're going to do that. So seeing the industry evolve over, 20, 25 years, it's been absolutely fascinating. And I think having an endless curiosity is, in that sense, agnostic of what route you pursue, is always going to be to your benefit.
Interesting. And do you have any books you can suggest for UX user, design?
Yes, I do. I think you could never go wrong with the design of everyday things. Don Norman, that is a fantastic read that I've gone back to time and time again. Yeah, I can't say enough about it. It's kind of a must read in design or human centered design or user experience. It's more dealing with tangible objects, if you will, but just the common sense, human centered approach to how things work and how people interact with X. I think that's a must read. And then just something I had read fairly recently, Fusion by Denise Leone is more about the fusion between brand and culture and how they're inseparable, more or less. They're synonymous. So that was a good read, and that's something I would also recommend.
Okay, let's get back to the work culture. So, who do you think, which of the companies have the best work cultures?
Well, these days it's pretty easy to, if you're looking for a business or a larger brand that you want to join, and just taking a look, where does culture or our people fall in their navigation? Or do they have like a life at X company page where you can look and instantly see, when somebody comes in from the 9 to 5, what is a given day like? I think Shopify does a tremendous job with things like I just cited about how they value their people and how they their culture isn't just something they hashtag on Twitter because it sounds good. They have a tremendously empathetic and human-centered culture. HubSpot also comes to mind. They published a document called the Culture Code. I think it has something like 4 million views, and it's an ever-evolving document. And they feature that on their website. And their culture is absolutely intrinsic to their pillars and who they are and what they represent. So those are just a couple that come to mind. But if you look at a business and you click on About, and it's 3 links with C-level staff and nothing about the people or nothing about those who are actually producing the work or nothing about the culture, I think that's a warning sign.
Oh, okay. But why do you think a lot of these tech companies are focusing on culture? Do you think there are other financial companies or other companies in different industries which also focus on culture, or is it just because you've been into tech that you think that more tech companies with great work culture?
Well, that's certainly my comfort zone because that's where I've operated and that's where I come from. But I mean, any business, manufacturing, electronics, tech, design, textiles, whatever. I mean, they have to. Again, this seems like the most intuitive thing, but they have to focus on culture again because it all comes down to empathy and treating the most formative lesson that we get as kids. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It all comes down to that. So if it's a large manufacturing company, is it flex time? Is it tremendous healthcare benefits? Is it, like I said, these areas around the office where people can step away from the manufacturing floor for a little bit and defuse without being judged? So my lens through which I'm talking mostly is design and tech, again, because that's kind of my home base. But these tenets, I'll say human-centered over and over again, need to be in the DNA of business, period. Because at the end of the day, it's the people who are producing the work or designing this product or toiling away with their hands to build something. And people need to be supported and advocated for and empathetically supported, bottom line.
No, absolutely. The next generation of workers, the millennials and Gen Zs, they're very particular about what products to buy and which company they want to work in. So yes, you're absolutely right. The corporates need to be a little more careful about the culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what is the number one thing you hope readers take away from your book?
I might sound a little bit like a broken record here, but truly it is, I suppose it's 2 things. One, don't settle. Do not settle for a business that is not supportive of you and your passion and yourself as an individual and a human being, because there are businesses out there, and I just kind of talked earlier about how to identify them if you're browsing around online. There are businesses out there who are doing it right. And they are out there. And I'm not saying, just quit your job and find it. I've done it a couple of times in my career, and it's very stressful because you have to pay the bills and you have to have food on the table. I mean, we all get that, but don't settle at the end of the day because your passion is too precious to be extinguished by unhealthy business culture and leaderships that don't support you. The other thing is empathy needs to be at the core of all interactions, and I talk about that ad nauseum in my book. And I talk about it in the design sector. I talk about it with a fellow who runs a pizzeria and is also a TEDx speaker because of exactly that, how he runs his business in a transparent, empathetic, supportive fashion. So that has to be baked into the DNA of how you operate and treat people. Everyone is an individual. Everyone is just trying to do the right thing. And some people have good days and some people have bad days, and not immediately judging or office politics are kind of the most cancerous thing alongside ego. So operating in an empathetic, humble, human-centered fashion and treating, your fellow human being decently, that's really what it's all about.
Got it. So Justin, let's quickly do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
What business book? I'm sorry.
What's your favorite business book?
My favorite business book. I'm going to give you the same answer that I did before. Design of Everyday Things. Absolutely. I can't come back. It's not a formal design book per se, but these examples and just human-centered focus is kind of at the core of everything, and that really defines who I am. So I'm going to give you the same answer there.
Okay. And if you go back in time when you started working on your book, what is the one thing you would have focused on?
Oh boy, that's a great question. The first time I wrote this book, I was a novice, and I knew at the core of what I was writing, human-centered approach to design, human-centered approach to and a human-centered approach to culture were really the core things. And in the first edition of my book, I think I tackled that successfully, and the second edition is going to take that a step further and really make those correlations between human-centered design in process and also human-centered focus back to people in the office and back to those office dynamics. So after publishing the book and speaking at places around the world, and more so this year, and having these podcast interviews, I've gained, always in a sense of humility and seeking to learn and being a student of my craft and just having these dialogues with people. I've learned a lot more and gained much more experience about making that correlation between human-centered design process and human-centered interaction. So, I would have hoped I nailed that in the first book. I think the second edition is going to flesh that out much more in example and design and approach, and I'm really excited to be working on that in the 15 minutes I have a night when my son isn't crying.
Okay, got it. And do you have any favorite online tools? For example, Gmail, Slack, Trello.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the list that you cited, and we kind of use all for various reasons. Slack for communication. We use Trello for, of course, project and allocation tracking in some sense. When you ask a designer that question, we're always going to be a little snobbish about critiquing the UX or what could be improved, and I'm not going to get into that too much. But those kind of collaboration tools are phenomenal. Slack and Trello, and we always I have a meeting. We have typical stand-ups, of course. I have a meeting called Creative Inspiration Wednesday, where my entire team pauses on Wednesday, and we bring in something that inspired us. Sometimes people bring in different tools and say, what if we try this? And we'll give something a try and see if it sticks or doesn't. So we're always kind of nimble in that sense, and always, kind of geeks about new products.
Okay. And what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 ways. I am at Pseudorum, PSEUDOROOM. That's my personal handle, and that's on Twitter and Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. Pseudorum.com is my folio and my speaking engagements and my written pieces. So that's one way to engage. The other one is my book at the culture book, the _ Culture Book is my handle for the book on Instagram and social media. And then the-culturebook.com is the book's website in and of itself.
All right, Justin, best of luck for your book, and thanks a lot for coming on to the show.
Thanks, Rohit. I appreciate the opportunity, and this was a great chat.
Thanks for listening to the Life Self-Mastery Podcast, where we teach you how to start and grow your online business. For more information, visit Rohit's blog at www.lifeselfmastery.com.